Thank you very much, Secretary Moniz. And just to reiterate what the Secretary mentioned earlier, we are conducting this event through our Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear, and just so folks know, through GAIN, we have arranged for the Center for Advanced Energy Studies at the Idaho National Laboratory to serve as the rapporteur for today's session and to prepare a report that we hope will be a useful tool and can spur some further action at the appropriate, all the appropriate levels, based on the outcome of today's discussions. With that, I'd like to quickly turn to another individual who is very well known to most, if not all of us, and that's Marv Fertel, the President and CEO of the Nuclear Energy Institute, a position Marv has held since 2009. I believe Marv goes back to the formation of NEI in '94 when he was Vice President for Nuclear Economics and Fuel Supply, then became Senior VP and Chief Nuclear Officer in 2003 and has been at the helm for the last 7 years. Marv, please come on up. Thank you.
Thank you, John, and I want to thank Secretary Moniz both for convening this group and for his continued leadership on a lot of our issues, as well as other important issues for our country. He actually hit on some stuff I'm going to touch on, and I'll try and add maybe a little more granularity from our perspective on it. Let me start by saying this is the second summit that this administration has held since the beginning of the year. We appreciate their interest in nuclear. The first summit looked at advanced reactors, and it showed the future for nuclear looks really bright with the entrepreneurial spirit in our country and the technical know-how that we have. And I think the Secretary pointed to some good things going on, like Vogtle and Summer and Watts Bar starting up and what we're doing in SMRs. And to me, that's important for us not to lose sight of. Having said that, we have some real challenges right now for an existing fleet that's an exceptionally well-performing existing fleet. And my theme throughout this is going to be a sense of urgency. There's a lot of things going on, but we need a much, much greater sense of urgency to address the issues that we're seeing right now. Let me start by saying that we thought the first plant shutdowns at Kewaunee and Vermont Yankee would galvanize action to prevent additional shutdowns, and we were obviously mistaken. And these early shutdowns, I would say, are not isolated events. We have a systemic problem, and it's a bad systemic problem. So we thought that would be a wake-up call for everybody, and we would mobilize much better as a country, both in the states, at the federal level, and in the industry to address this. And we haven't. And I'm afraid that we look at the other shutdowns and announcements as isolated events, and they're not. So unless we address the systemic problem, we're going to have a bigger problem. So over the last several years, the companies have shut down or announced the shutdown of 8 reactors, about 6,300 megawatts, as Secretary Moniz said. That means that we put about 6,000 people out of work and probably another 6,000 to 10,000 people that support those plants in trouble. Okay, so there is not just a plant shutting down, there is a physical thing to families, to communities, and to individuals that's happening when these decisions are made, if they're not the necessary or correct decisions. And I would tell you they're neither necessary nor correct, in my opinion. Okay? If we lose all the plants that we have lost, plus we see actually more than the Secretary mentioned, we see 15 to 20 plants at risk of shutdown over the next 5 to 10 years. In some cases, those are plants that may not go for license renewal. I don't mean 60 to 80, I mean 40 to 60. Okay? And in other cases, it's plants that may shut down for the same type of problems we've seen the other ones shut down, which are market-related. If we were to lose all those plants, and assuming they're replaced with the most high-efficiency combined-cycle gas plants, it would wipe out approximately 1/4 of the gains achieved by the Clean Power Plan if it was implemented. That represents about 45% of the commitment the U.S. made in December at COP21. So there's a loss of human capital, there's a loss of electric reliability, and there's a tremendous impact on us meeting our carbon goals, as well as, to be honest, some of our other clean air goals. You've all heard that Exelon announced on its last earnings call that it cannot continue to sustain losses at its Quad City and Clinton nuclear units in Illinois. The company has lost about $800 million over the last 7 years at those plants. Illinois must reduce its carbon emissions by about 30 million tons by 2030 under the Clean Power Plan. Losing Quad Cities and Clinton would increase that compliance obligation by an additional 20 million tons, 20 million over the 30 million that they have. Quad Cities, in fact, and any large 2-unit nuclear station produces about as much electricity in a single year as all of the utility-scale solar in America last year. We support utility-scale solar, we support wind, we support solar. We just need perspective on what we're losing when we lose a nuclear power plant. You lose a tremendous amount of system reliability, large jobs, and our ability to meet the Clean Power Plan or any commitment to carbon for that matter. Let me talk a bit about the fact that nuclear and renewables are not on the same scale, and while we support all of them, we need to recognize the reality. And in the debates, what happens is the reality isn't recognized. I will be very straight with the administration people here. We know you want to help nuclear, but all we hear about is renewables. And renewables are good, but they're not the answer for everything. They're part of the answer for some things and part of the solution to what we're trying to get to. So we need to keep that in mind. And if you look at some of the projections, what you find is that it's conceivable that wind and solar combined may produce as much electricity in 2040, conceivable, as nuclear energy does today. Okay, so with all we're doing in wind and solar, which is a lot, you might get to what we do, which is about 800 billion kilowatt hours per year, by 2040. Okay, and that's with renewable portfolio standards putting it in. It's what we have in PTC and ITC. It's what we have with all of the effort the administration is making to try and make the technology even more efficient. And it's with a lot of companies doing good things. Again, not a bad thing, but it needs perspective. It's also intermittent. Okay, it's not 24/7, and I'll touch on that when we talk valuation, as the Secretary did. By 2020, we'll have shut down at least 60,000 megawatts, or 20% of our coal-fired capacity, because of tighter environmental limits, and we'll shut down about another 40,000 megawatts due to the Clean Power Plan. And if you look, the pipeline for coal-fired projects under development is all but empty right now. Coal-fired plants and nuclear plants have always been the baseload backbone of our electric system. And we always talk about diversity. Well, what about diversity of baseload generating capacity? If we lose all our coal eventually, and it's not happening overnight, and we shut down most of our nuclear, the only baseload capacity our country will have will be gas. Gas is good for our country, tremendous value from an economic standpoint, tremendous value for bringing back manufacture, important to the electric supply system. But do we want to have only gas as our baseload supply? The answer is no. We want diversity, whether it's in your 401k portfolio or it's in our electric system portfolio. We need diversity, and we need to think about that. Natural gas is part of the strength of our country, and it will always be, and it will be even better with what we're doing right now. If I look at the cost of nuclear plants, the most costly nuclear plants, the smaller single-unit stations that we've been losing, produce electricity on average for approximately $45 a megawatt hour, or 4.5 cents a kilowatt hour if you look at your bills. On average, our nuclear plants last year produced electricity for a little under $36 per megawatt hour, and the first quartile at about $31, or just about 3 cents per kilowatt hour. You shouldn't be losing plants like that. I mentioned Quad Cities. It produces electricity at 2.8 cents per kilowatt hour. 2.8 cents per kilowatt hour, and Exelon may have to shut it down for dysfunctional market conditions. That really would seem very appalling to me, and I would hope to you. Now, if you're looking at today, we have gas from the Marcellus at $1 or under sometimes, and we have gas in general at $2 to $3. And that's because we have loads of gas, and we'll have loads of gas for a long time. It's not going to stay there. It's not going to go to 10 or 12, but it is going to go to 3 or 4 or 5. And we need to understand that as we make short-term decisions, which have long-term impacts on consumers and everybody else. Okay, let me turn to why this is happening, and then to some ideas on what we can do about it, which hopefully the panels can then really elaborate on. Okay. I look forward on today's discussion on a few issues. DOE has assembled really a lot of good people in this room. I hope you all get to contribute. I hope when you leave here you have good ideas. Secretary wants to be helpful for sure. And there's a limited amount of things he may be able to do, but maybe there's things the states and others can do. Okay. The simple answer why this is happening is because the markets, and particularly the competitive markets, have not yet developed the tools and techniques to do what the Secretary said, which is value the different attributes of different types of generation. So, for instance, wind doesn't have any emissions. That's good. It's intermittent. That's not as good. Okay, coal has emissions. That's not so good, but it's dispatchable. That's good. Okay, and I can store fuel. That's good. Nuclear does all of those things really well. We get almost no value for any of them. We have good price stability going forward. We have reliability things on the grid to keep it stable. We have fuel on site so we don't have to shut down, and we have the clean air aspects, not just carbon, clean air compliance. We get no value for any of it. So I would encourage the DOE that's looking at valuations not only to look at it, and I know it's part of the QED, but the sooner the better. And a report on it doesn't do anything unless the RTOs and FERC do something with it. So you need to get it to them, they need to do something with it, and they need to do it sooner, to be honest, rather than later. If I look at other things that can be done, we have executive orders right now that the administration put out that call for renewables at government facilities. That's good. If you really wanted to do carbon better, you would call for carbon reduction, and you would change it from renewables to a much higher standard for zero or low carbon electricity. Because I thought the policy option and the issue we had was reducing carbon emissions. If it was deploying renewables, we ought to be clear that that is the policy, not reducing carbon. Okay, so again, to be completely frank about it, if it is carbon, then use all your non-carbon emitting sources, hydro, nuclear, wind, solar. Don't limit it to technology choices. I think the states, what I would encourage the states to look at is, I know in competitive market states, the public utility commissions don't have anything overriding on generation. But you still have a phenomenal commitment, I know, to make sure your customers are served with affordable and reliable electricity. You need to make yourself heard and involved to make sure the markets are giving you that for the longer term. And if they're not, you need to do things that would be helpful by telling your legislature they need to do something else. One of the things that's imperative right now is in Illinois, okay, to move forward with the legislation, or we are going to shut down 3 nuclear plants there. And I already told you one is producing electricity at 2.8 cents per kilowatt hour. Okay, there is a budget battle between the governor and the legislature. What I would say is your budget problems get dramatically worse if those plants shut down, and you now have a bunch of unemployed people and a bunch of reliability issues on your electricity system. So action is the most important thing I would encourage, whether you're the state of Illinois, the state of New York that's looking at a clean energy standard, or your other states that are on the cusp of losing plants 5 years from now. A sense of urgency and actions are really important. And I know that John wants to move on from this. He allowed the secretary to keep going. I will note, I completely understand the reason for that. So I thank you for your attention. I look forward to what the panels say. And again, I would leave you with, this is a serious, it's a systemic problem. It's not isolated. And it requires real action now. Not 5 years from now, because we'll lose a lot of plants over that 5-year period. Thank you for coming today, and thank you for what you can do to help.